Great. Thank you, Susan. Welcome everybody back to our workshop. I'm just going to very fast show you the agenda. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, that looks
good. Legible? Okay, perfect. So we are going to go through a recap right now, talk about the agenda. We will be reviewing the situational model. We will be looking at a threat rating activity or an exercise. Then we will have a 5-minute break, 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how much time we have or how much time we take for each one of these activities. We will also finalize the strategy selection that we started yesterday. We will have another break, and then we'll start working into theories of change, which will be what we will use most of our time today and tomorrow. And then the closing and next steps and some thoughtful homework for you guys. So yesterday we looked at an overview. We looked at different issues that are important for hummingbird conservation, especially the Western hummingbird conservation. And we also looked at the situational model that we showed you. You commented on it. And Jacqueline and I, we brought all these comments, we looked at them, and we updated the situational model, which is something I will be showing you in a minute. And then we went on and brainstormed some strategies. We are going to go into the strategy too. Again, we lumped some of them, we put some of them together, and we will be finalizing which ones are worth, which ones are the ones we want to put our time and our effort into. Okay, so that's the agenda for today. I just want to remind you that in case you have something that you feel is not being covered sufficiently, there's a bike rack in this presentation. And Jacqueline, can you share the link to this presentation again, just in case they close it? Thank you. That's awesome. Okay, so that's on slide 2. Slide 2, you've got the bike rack. And if you have topics that you would like to come back to or questions or anything, we review this. There were no issues from yesterday to today, but we will be reviewing them. Okay, set this. I'm going to go to the situation model. I'm going to go into presentation mode. I'm going to show the situation model in English and talk to it. But on slide 7, you will find the updated situation model in Spanish. Okay, so I'm going to go into presentation mode. Does it look good? Okay, good. What we did was take all your comments. Thank you so much for the comments. They were really good. And we were looking at we changed some things, like, for example, climate change effects, which ones were important. We changed also the biophysical effects, made them into a box, and included some of the things that weren't in that box before, things like loss of nesting sites, phenological mismatch, disease transmission. We also looked at and updated some of the threats, looking at what was a better wording and what made more sense. And then we also changed some of the contributing factors or drivers, some of the relationships, and organized them and expanded some of them depending on what the comments were. We believe we have addressed all your comments and included them into the situational model. I must say that some of the comments were more about strategies, and we will look at them in the next session. Some of the comments were more about results or outcomes that we wanted to get. Those are also what we will be doing in the next session. But now this is a situational model, and I would like to give you a couple of minutes, maybe some 10 minutes, for you to go into slides 6 and 7 and take a look at what we have here. There are numbers, as you can see on my screen. There are numbers, so you know how to use them. You place a number where you think it makes, where your comment is pertinent, and you can write down below your name and what the comment is. This would be very, very helpful. We will not take a lot of time on this. Yeah, so it will also be part of the homework between today and tomorrow that you complete and look at it with all the pieces you have, and just sit down and figure out if you feel comfortable enough with this.
Did we lose Armando?
It seems like it did. I was checking to make sure I didn't lose me, but it seems like we lost Armando. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. I also had a few things to note. So as Armando mentioned, we did incorporate a lot of these comments. However, some of the comments were added more into the details, so you may not visually be able to see them on the model, but we noted which ones were added to the details. So actually, if you jump through slides 13 and 14 and 16 and 17, so the slides where we added the feedback yesterday in those breakout groups, we tried to note what was addressed, whether it was added to the model, if it was brought in as to the strategy brainstorm, if there wasn't action taken, or clarification needed, and also, like I said, if it was added to as a detail. So the detail is a little bit more behind the scenes, but that information was captured. So that might help you if you're wondering specifically for your own comment, what Armando and I did a little bit more behind the scenes. I did just see something in the chat about arrows maybe. Oh wait, that's me, but I think that's helpful about arrows not aligning. So we can double check. Again, it's a quick turnaround and a lot of comments. So we did our best to incorporate things, but we will just make sure between the English version and the Spanish version that all of those links are the same. Armando, it looks like you're back. I just let them know that if they're looking for specifically what action we took on their comment, they can look back through slides 14 and 15. It looks like in 17 and 18.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Something happened with my internet. It's not working that well. And I see a comment already in slide 7, so I'll give you a quiet time for you to go through 6 and 7. We have about, let's say, some 10 minutes, and then we can move on. If you have any questions, please let us know.
Yep, and feel free to ask us directly in the chat if it's something you don't want to ask the whole group. Last thing I'll say, Armando, is some of the comments you'll see, maybe we didn't incorporate exactly how participants wanted, just due to simplicity. So we'll take a look, and we're just trying to find the balance between, again, making this model as helpful as possible without being so complex that it loses meaning. So sometimes we want to represent the most important links. It doesn't mean that other links don't exist. And I see in the chat, this is a good reminder that we probably have a few people on the call who weren't here yesterday. So maybe we need to do a little bit more backtracking. Apologies. Just about dragging the actual activity itself. What we're asking you to do on slide 6 or 7, whichever slide you feel most comfortable with, there's an English and a Spanish version, is if you see any comments, they can be as small as change the wording of this box to an arrow wanting to be added to this isn't even a factor that should be in the model. You can just drag one of those little blue numbers on the left-hand side of the slide. We'll put it in the chat one more time. And then in the notes pane down below, you might need to drag it up on your screen. You can write your comment. You can additionally respond to other people's comments. So if you agree or disagree or have any additional information, you can respond to a comment that's already in there. Let us know if you would like more clarification. We're happy to give more.
And maybe what I'll do is I'll pause the recording while you do that. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, we could do that way. Would that work, Jacqueline and Armando? Okay.
That's perfect. When we have a group, oh, sorry, Susan. When we have a group box, like the one on biophysical effects or the one on climate change effects, there might be some relationships in the arrows from one of the elements in the group box to another element in the group box. If we think that it affects more than one, then we will try to link it to the group box where the element is. It's just visually to solve the problem of having too many arrows and creating a spaghetti model instead of a situational model. I don't know, Jacqueline, if you want to add something to that.
No, hopefully that's clear to folks. Looking through the comments yesterday, we did have a few comments that said, something like, oh, it'd be great if overgrazing was linked to loss of habitat. But if you look at the model from that entire group box of habitat degradation activities, there's a link going to loss of habitat. So we're saying that all 4 of those activities listed under habitat degradation are leading to that, as an example. So there are some limitations we have for visualization. Marathi software is quite powerful, and it's more than a modeling tool. There's actually an entire relational database going on behind the scenes. So we can't link things more than once. If that link already exists, we can't have another arrow to show that.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I don't know, can we open it for a couple of minutes? And does anybody looking at the conceptual model or at the situational model, does anybody have some comments on it, about it in general? Saraí?
Sí. Hola, mira, algo que no estoy viendo y no sé si sea oportuno, el comentar una situación de los bebederos. Ayer teníamos algunas referencias y el manejo de los bebederos tiene un impacto, ¿no? En cómo se mueven los colibríes. Y bueno, lo hemos estado viendo. Recientemente hubo algunos resultados que se mostraron que, pues sí, efectivamente, si los bebederos pueden también como encontrarse hongos, bacterias, y bueno, no veo nada relacionado con los bebederos aquí en el modelo.
Saraí, sí, voy a mostrar, no sé si puedo mostrar mi pantalla y mostrarles esto. Es que lo has llamado bebederos, lo estamos llamando comederos, o sea, lo puedo cambiar a bebederos, no hay problema.
Ok, no lo vi, perdón.
Ya, y está justo entre la caja de actividades prácticas que degradan el hábitat y la caja que dice pérdida directa de los individuos, o sea, esas 2 cajas grupales. Hay uno que dice falta de higiene de comederos, en verdad son bebederos, tienes razón, es néctar, no es agua con azúcar, es bebedero, y va a transmisión de enfermedades. Ahí sí estaría contemplado, Saraí.
Sí, gracias, no lo vi. Lo estaba buscando
Dale.
Y no lo había visto. Sí, gracias.
Dale. Okay, good. Any other comments? Maybe somebody raised their hand and we can give them the...
Todd, you turned on your camera. Did you want to say anything?
No, I think it was already on, just a glitch that it all of a sudden flashed. So no, I'm good.
Okay.
I think my written comments on that we hadn't really addressed migratory habitat well enough in the model, I think are captured in the comments. So I'm just going to assume that they get wrapped up and don't need further verbal comment.
Well, I think that's actually something, Jacqueline and Armando, that when we came back yesterday, did we discuss the migratory habitat, migratory range issues?
Yeah, range is something that maybe could use further discussion, because I know it can be a kind of a good and a bad effect, right? There's expansion and contraction of ranges happening. And I think, sorry if I didn't capture that, but I think I noted on somewhere between slides 14 and 18 that wasn't currently addressed in the model. So we can make a note to see how to add that in. But of course, if you have specific suggestions, or if we just want to add a biophysical effect that says, range expansions and contractions, and show that there's this positive, potential positive and potential negative, we're happy to add that in.
Great.
I'll make a note of it in case there's not one in there.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that before yesterday, I think the habitat was for year round, and I think the change was made to make it just for breeding season. And I think it's just better to have the habitat without the specification for breeding season in that box.
Okay.
Got it. Okay.
Can you add that comment in? I mean, we'll try and take the comments as, obviously we're trying to lump them together. So, if one comment says this should be added for breeding season, and then the other one contradicts it, those are perfect examples of why it's great to have everyone on the call and have a quick discussion. So the loss of natural habitat, I know there was some desire for more clarity between habitat being for breeding or living in general versus habitat being for food. So to give more context, the distinction that was made was loss of natural habitat for breeding and loss of floral resources for food. If for breeding being added to natural habitat is too specific, and that distinguishment is now captured by adding for food to floral resources, then let's remove that so it can apply to both non-breeding and breeding habitats.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I just mentioned,
There's a few
just to
hands.
mention,
Yeah, we have a few hands up.
yeah, just to mention that I included it as a comment number 12, what Greg just mentioned and Todd just mentioned. I think Lisa and then Jorge.
Thanks. So I just put a note in the comment section in regards to concerns about feeders. We have done some studies so far. I think it's still a concern, and I would list it as not so much of a concern, but so far, we haven't seen any specific pathogens, even though the isolated bacteria are definitely more diverse than what we isolated from flowers for the studies that we did. But the one that I'd really like to add is water structures and gardens. I think that's a really big threat to hummingbirds, especially as there's less water available. Diseases like trichomoniasis, salmonella, there's a lot of diseases that can be transmitted there. So if we could add that somewhere, that would be great. Thanks.
Great. I did add a blue number for you.
So Lisa,
Jorge?
you mean bird baths and other water structures like bird baths?
Fountains. Or...
Yeah, bird baths, fountains, especially, the fountains, because even though they're circulating water, typically the water is just recirculating and the birds are defecating in it. And then fountains are stagnant, or bird baths, typically, some of those are going to be stagnant. So they're a huge threat for a lot of bird species.
Well, water troughs.
So are you talking about like water troughs where they're using the metal troughs that are typically used for feeding other animals, and they're using that as a water source, or
Yeah.
what kind of water trough?
Yeah, water, like for cattle. And
Yeah. So that would be a huge concern because typically those are galvanized, and there's lead and zinc in galvanization, which is, those are trace elements that are toxic to birds. So that's definitely a problem. I wonder if they would use them so much. I'm curious if that's been your experience.
I think so. Especially, they're the only water source in some dry and rural areas.
Yeah, sure.
Right
Yeah,
across
especially if the water level's low in the trough. Yeah.
And they use
Yeah.
them a lot.
So, yeah.
We can add those examples to the details there.
Water guzzlers too. A lot of like Pheasants Forever and those groups put out guzzlers in the desert. They're often still water.
Great. Jorge?
Okay. Thank you. I actually like having the breeding habitat there because just to make really a very important point that is different what you need when you're feeding that when you're breeding. And I'm going to, and there's another thing, as I mentioned yesterday, there are 2 species of migratory hummingbirds that will come to Mexico and will have breeding populations in Mexico at least. So it's in that case, for example, for the broadtail, it's really hard to say what's breeding and what's wintering or non-breeding, because we have mixed populations in Jalisco, for example. They have the migratory birds coming from the US and Canada, and we have a breeding population from Mexico going there and actually breeding during the winter. And so it can be confusing. And so having the habitat breeding elements there, I think is important, because at least for the broadtail, the places they need to breed, there is the fir forest, and the places they're using to feed is basically the open spaces around the forest. So it's 2 completely different habitats in that case.
Thank you, Jorge. Yeah, it's clear that with a lot of migratory birds, you've got that overlap between resident and non-resident birds, so, or population, sorry. So that's an important thing. I was just going to say that I know there's this distinction in the way you visualize hummingbirds between the non-breeding and breeding areas, but it is important to have a situation model that tries to portray the situation for the whole species. These species require both the breeding and non-breeding areas, so it's the idea of the model is to show the whole picture of what is required. And regarding, for example, the migratory routes and that routes and that kind of idea, that could also vary due to climate change and land use change and so on. So we have to keep in mind that we're trying to get the big picture. And a last comment from Sarai, and then we're going to jump into the next session. Remember, just as a reminder, you still have the option to put in comments, and we will use those comments to update the situation model and show it to you tomorrow too. Sarai.
Sí, muchas gracias. Miren, algo que yo encontré en una visita que tuve en Alaska, que estuve ahí con Gwen, y también un recorrido un poco con el norte de Estados Unidos, como para entender precisamente a qué le llamamos hábitat para los colibríes, sobre todo para los migratorios. Encontré algunas particularidades que son muy compartidas y tiene que ver, por ejemplo, con las zonas boscosas y estos claros. estos claros que Jorge mencionaba, claro, no tendrían que ser de un tamaño tan enorme. Y ahorita voy a hacer como una tasa proporcional de cuando te dicen, oye, ¿cómo le pones al bebedero la cantidad de azúcar y de agua? Es como esto también pasa en el hábitat de los colibríes. O sea, ¿cuánto tendríamos que dejar de bosque para que tengan cierto microclima y cuánto tendríamos que dejar de áreas abiertas, que es donde ellos se alimentan? Ellos tienen un poco de gradiente entre un área abierta, un borde y el bosque. Estas tres partes las necesitan en zonas de anidación. Yo lo vi en Alaska. Y bueno, si está Gwen, quizás ella pudiera explicar un poco más allá. Pero en México también lo tenemos. Entonces, algo que me pareció extraordinario, y he estado hablando de esto, es que esos lugares donde anidan mantienen una cierta temperatura que está relacionada con la humedad. Y la proporción, cuando yo me pongo a ver el bebedero para ver qué cantidad de agua necesita y azúcar, es como que yo también pienso, bueno, qué cantidad de bosque con un área abierta se necesitaría. Pues también saco una proporción, ¿no? Y la tengo mental, pero no la he probado, pero sí debemos de considerar un 60-70% de bosque y unas tiras de vegetación secundaria para que luego se abra el 30% o quizás un 10% de zonas abiertas. Les voy a decir, ya nada más rápido para terminar, una proporción que he encontrado cuando hay incendios forestales aquí y por qué cuando se abren áreas muy amplias los colibríes no están en toda esa área. Ellos, por ejemplo, cuando se han abierto áreas de 60 hectáreas que se quema todo el bosque, ¿por qué no están todos los colibríes ahí? ¿Por qué buscan ciertas partes? Y estas están relacionadas precisamente con el microclima y donde crecen esas plantas, y generalmente corresponde al 10% de toda un área que fue perturbada. Entonces sí debemos de encontrar esas partes de microclima y conectar la gran cantidad de bosque que bordea a esas zonas abiertas que las llaman también praderas.
Gracias, Saraí. I'm just thinking about, Saraí was talking about the requirements for habitat on hummingbirds. How much of it is forest, how much of it is open spaces and so on. But I think it's captured within the habitat loss, or the loss of habitat as a biophysical factor. And in the threats that we have been looking at, I hope that's good and it has it. Otherwise, we can try to put some more detail into the details of that box. Each one of these boxes, factors, threats, biophysical factors, and conservation targets have, as Jacqueline was mentioning, it's a database. So you see the visual diagram, or image, but it's a database behind it. And in that database, we can put in some details that might not be on the box when you see it, but they're in the details of that box. So every time we pull it up, we've got that information too. Okay. I would like to go on into the next session. We're a little bit behind, but not much. And I would like to show you, talk a little bit, just a very short, no more than 2 minutes, about threat rating. And we're then going to go and do a threat rating exercise with all of you. So this part, I'm going to show my, can you guys see my screen? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go into slideshow mode. I'm going to talk about threat ratings. Basically, we try to rate the impact of threats on different conservation targets. And we use 3 criteria. The first one, we call it extent or scope, or in Spanish is alcance or extensión. It's the proportion of the target that can be expected to be affected within 10 years if we have business as usual. So if things happen the same way as the trends are showing us in the next 10 years, how much, what proportion of the target is going to be affected. We also then use severity. Severity is the level of damage within that scope or extent, the level of damage to the conservation target within, again, the time window of 10 years. And we generally use irreversibility, to the degrees to which the effects of a threat can be reversed if the threat is eliminated. Okay, so as you know, some threats cannot be eliminated, so that gives it very low irreversibility. Sorry, very high irreversibility. So if we go into extent, it's the proportion of the target. If we're looking at species, it could be the proportion of population to be affected by the threat in the next 10 years. And we look at it this way: 4 categories. The fourth is very high. It's pervasive in its extent, affecting the target across 71% or more of its occurrence. It is high, it's widespread, but not pervasive, affecting the target between 31 and 70% of its occurrence. Medium, it's restricted in its extent. It's affecting the target across 11 to 30% of its occurrence. And low, but low, it's low, but it's still a threat, right? Likely to be very narrow in its extent, affecting the target across 1 to 10% of its occurrence. As you see, these categories are not equally distributed, but on the percentage or proportion of the population or ecosystem that it's being affected. And this is an idea of trying to be as conservative as possible and be reacting to these threats before they become more extensive or more pervasive. Sarai, you raised your hand? Okay. When we look at severity, we're looking at the level of damage from the threat to the conservation target within the scope, and that can be expected within these 10 years that we're talking about. So very high is that it destroys or eliminates the target or reduces its population by 71 to 100% within 10 years or 3 generations. When we're talking about species, it's easier to think about generations. High, it seriously degrades or reduces the target by 31 to 70%. Medium, it moderately degrades or reduces the target between 11 and 30%. And low, it slightly degrades or reduces the target 10% of the extension rate. And everything with, so if we think of it, it's the extent shows us how much of the population or the ecosystem, the population of the species or the ecosystem is being affected. And severity tells us how deep or how worrisome is that effect. Is it killing them? Is it maiming them? What is it doing to the extent? Is it destroying, degrading, reducing, etc.? And irreversibility is a degree to which the effects of the threat on a target can be restored. Very high is it cannot be reversed, and it's very unlikely that the target can be restored, or it would take more than 100 years. We're using these time windows to help us understand it. High, it can technically be reversed, and the target can be restored, but it's not practically affordable, or it would take 100 years to achieve this. Medium, it can be reversed, can be restored with a reasonable commitment of resources between 6 and 20 years. And low, it is easily reversed and the target can be easily restored at a relative low cost or within 5 years. Okay. So this looks like, for example, this one is in the Huanghe National Park. And the main target here, the conservation target, is a painted dog, but there's also some of the resources that the painted dog feeds on and the habitat where the painted dog lives. And you can see here some of the threats. So there's encroachment, there's legal hunting, illegal hunting, mining, land management practices, and how they affect each one of the conservation targets. And what we try to do is find some, using these criteria, is find some level of ranking or rating that can help us think, oh, this is high, this is low, this is medium. Obviously, they're all threats. So that doesn't mean that because it's low, we should be, whoa, great, there's no problem there. But it can help us make decisions as to which threats might be more important or be a priority to address. Okay. There's a lot of things on the chat, but I'm not able to see them. Maybe
Right now they're all about the situation model still. So
okay.
I'll make sure I'm capturing them, but I'll jump in if there's any questions about the threat rating.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Again, Jacqueline, can you share with them the link so that they have this threat rating just in case, or do we go directly to the
It is in, I did add the criteria
okay.
Onto the second tab there. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So this is the exercise, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you a link to this threat rating and strategy session 2 activity. And step 1 will be to look over the threat rating criteria that are in the following tab, this tab here. I'm going to show you, it's got the same thing: scope, severity, irreversibility, low, medium, high, and very high. And this is the idea is that you read through this and know what we're talking about. Then find your name on the threat rating tab, which is I'm going to show you in a bit which tab it is, and rate each threat to the target's overall. Okay, the target is Western migratory hummingbird species, and that will be able to help you. On the 3rd tab and the 4th tab, we have the updated situation model in English and in Espanol for those of you, so you can take a look at it. But in the main thing is this tab here that says threat rating. As you can see, column B has all the threats in English, column C has all the threats in Spanish. You will find your names, you'll find your names here on row 6. So if you move, you can find your name here. And the idea for you is to do an overall rating, thinking about these criteria, but do an overall rating on each one of these threats. And they're all to a whole conservation target, which is the Western migratory hummingbirds. We've lumped them all together into one conservation target. We're not going to do per species, but just all of them together. What is the let's say that the effect of the impact of these threats on those on that group of hummingbirds? Does that make sense? Do you want to add something, Jacqueline?
Sure. Just a few thoughts. Otherwise, I hope that was pretty clear. We will share the Google link. I'll put it in the chat right now, directly to this threat slide. If you can, try and work, pretty independently. Of course, we're all on one sheet, so it's pretty easy to look across, but try to work independently. Additionally, if I'm missing your name, I've been trying to keep it up to date. There are names in here who aren't on here. If it's confusing, I will try to hide them. But let me know if your name is not on there at all, and I can easily add it. Last thing is we will use this as a starting point for our discussion. So it's a lot of information to pack into one number, but really what we're trying to do here is just get a sense of, in relation to one another, if some threats are, of a higher magnitude than others that are listed, and what that relationship is. I had one more thing to say, but I've already forgotten it. Just reach out if you have any questions. Oh, you do need to click return, like click enter, as you're putting your ratings in. Perfect. Thank you, Becky. That's what I was going to say is, yes, if you feel, that's the exact thing I was going to say. If you feel like you really do not have enough expertise and you don't feel comfortable rating something, please don't put a 0, just abstain from it. And we'll defer to people who have more expertise. If you have even a general sense, feel free to write something, but we don't want to put people in an awkward position. I think that's
a
it.
good point. Thank
Yeah.
you, Jacqueline. Just, you might have some expertise in some of the threats and not in all of them. So just, you can also abstain from some of them, or just write on, or put your magnitude rating on some of the threats and not all of them. That's okay too.
Yeah. This will be quite brief. If you have more to add, of course, add it to the chat if you'd like. If you want to add it to the spreadsheet, there is a feature if you click on a specific box to add a comment, but we'll be here and have a discussion. So
Jorge and Christine are raising their hands. Jorge?
I have a question, because we need to rate the scope, the severity, and the irreversibility, no? But I am only seeing,
No, just keep in mind the 3 criteria. They can help you understand the extent of the magnitude, as Jacqueline was pointed out, of the threat. But we want an overall.
It's just one
overall
value from low to very high, thinking on these 3 things together.
Exactly.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Jorge. Christine and Anna?
Yeah, quickly. So when I go to this spreadsheet, is there another place where you can reread the definition of low, medium, high, very high?
yes.
Yeah.
On tab 2, it says threat rating criteria.
Okay, well, I click on that. Okay, I'll have to try again. And then another person asked there, if you feel like you don't have enough expertise in an area, you can just not write anything.
Yeah, you can abstain if you think or you feel that you don't have the expertise.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Christine. Anna? You have a
So I had a question regarding fire as a threat. I know I'm just curious what the direction we're assuming, because there's the assumption that fires can be harmful to birds on the breeding grounds and migration, but positive on the wintering grounds. And I just want to make sure everybody's knows what direction we're talking about when they rate the threat. So
Susan, do you or anyone?
No, that's a very good question, Anna. Thanks so much. Yes, fire can be good and fire can be not good. So that, I guess, how do we clarify that? We're looking at the aspect of fire that could be a threat, which means, more in severe fires, more continuous fires. So I don't know if we need to specify that more. I need to look at how it's written in here. Is it just generally written as fire? I think we had unmanaged and managed.
Managed versus unmanaged.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to separate those. So unmanaged would be wildfire, of course, and managed would be in the sense of fire that managed fire that then removes plants that hummingbirds need, and that then aren't replaced. Say, for example, that might be one example of the impacts of managed fire.
So this would be, so it's negative. We're not talking about like controlled burns to increase habitat for hummingbirds, say on the wintering grounds.
No, that would, no,
Okay.
that could actually be a strategy. Let's think about that. But right now as a threat, it's what reduces the viability of these species. Is
Okay.
that correct, Susan?
Yes, that's correct. I guess kind of
Thank
like
you.
hummingbird feeders, right? We're giving them food, which
Yeah.
could be good, but then there are all these impacts from feeders.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thanks.
you.
So that's a really good question.
Yeah, thank you, Ana. Saraí?
Bueno, no, ya lo respondió Susan. Está bien.
Okay, gracias. Alison? Alison?
Sorry, I was muted. You had that bit where it sort of said increased severity and frequency. And up here in BC, we've had these massive events, and the smoke has, been blocking photosynthesis and so on. So it's had wide-ranging effects, not just respiratory, but in availability of even nectar. And so I was thinking that section where you had that number 13 with increased fire and frequency and severity might capture the concept of the bad part of fire rather than the renewal part of fire.
That is a good question. I think we're just thinking that due to changes in precipitation and increased temperature, you're basically having more severe and more frequent fires naturally, let's say, and that will change the habitats and change the landscapes where the hummingbirds are. So I would say it's also the negative part, right? Threat, the same as the unmanaged or managed fire that destroys habitat and resources.
Well, yes, but we actually have a problem whereby it's almost, it's really impeding the ability to migrate or feed.
Yeah.
We see loss of, I see nest abandonment, for example.
Okay.
Because, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's in line with what we were thinking when writing it down as a threat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Edison. Michael?
Sure. Hey, this is fantastic, but I'm challenged, and maybe I missed this in the instructions, but thinking about things geographically, and part of this was asked earlier, wintering versus breeding grounds. Are we to answer this from our perspective geographically where we sit now? I'm thinking of Rufous hummingbird, constraints on their wintering grounds. Agricultural expansion has a much different footprint in the areas to the south, Mexico, for instance, than it does as a threat, than it does in breeding areas in the US and Canada. And so I'm thinking holistically about the species and is this a threat overall, or is it relative to where I sit geographically? It's kind of, so it'd be interesting, maybe to parse these answers out by where the person sits later down the road, or maybe you have a ready answer for me. I don't know.
I'm gonna say, refer to Greg and what he says. I'll put the highest number appropriate to breeding or wintering migration. I agree with him. We have to have an holistic approach, because if we're trying to assess the threats across the whole range that these hummingbirds use. And yes, definitely some threats are higher in some places than in the others. But again, we have to address those threats if we want that species to thrive. So I would say it's a tricky issue, and you're right, Michael. It's a tricky issue. You will have expertise in one of the 2 or 3 different landscapes. That's possible, but I would encourage you to have more of a holistic approach to the whole distribution of these migratory birds, and be able to say, this is where it's higher, so I'll put that higher value or that higher magnitude in this cell.
Thanks.
Okay.
That helps.
Can
Jorge.
I just want to answer that question. Maybe in Mexico, a lot of the habitat that was used by these migratory hummingbirds was not affected dramatically by agriculture in the past. But in the last 15 years, avocado plantations in the mountains and things like agave plantations in the lowlands are dramatically changing the landscape. And it's something that is going to have very strong effects in the future, because once you set up avocado plantation, that is not going to be a forest again. So it's very reversible changes, at least in matters of decades. So I think that now is also a very important threat in Mexico.
Gracias, Jorge. Okay.
Great, and thanks, Greg. That's a great comment. If you're looking in the chat, I also just sent out a message. There are people who I know are on the call who don't have anything listed in the threat rating sheet. So if you're having any troubles, feel free. You can just use it by the number, like number 1, 4, number 2, 4. You know, just feel free to send them directly to me as well, and I'm happy to update the sheet. So we don't want you to feel like you're not participating because you can't get into the Google sheet. And I think we have a hand up. So sorry.
Saraí. Saraí.
Sí, nada más como comentario un poco en relación a las preguntas anteriores sobre incendios y de lo que acaba de hablar Jorge. Hay algo que creo que es muy importante mencionar, que porque los incendios, por supuesto que la respuesta que vamos a tener de los colibríes va a ser variada y tenemos rangos dependiendo de la frecuencia, de la intensidad, de la severidad de cada uno de los incendios. Sin embargo, de lo que hemos aprendido, y es porque estamos alertas a lo del cambio climático y con las políticas de supresión de los incendios, es que con la acumulación de combustible, esto va a incrementar y el calentamiento global, pues van a incrementar la intensidad y la magnitud de los incendios en el oeste. Y esto es algo que sí tendríamos que poner más atención, porque el suprimir los incendios te lleva a acumular. Ya tenemos un ejemplo de lo que pasó en Yellowstone y lo que ha estado pasando últimamente en Australia, en California. Y bueno, en nosotros, en el occidente de México, hemos aprendido sobre ecología del fuego, y yo creo que es importante entender que en cada uno de los biomas, especialmente donde ya el historial de perturbación por incendio se ha tenido, pues no hay que cambiarlo para no afectar tanto a los colibríes. Y eso es lo que nosotros estamos haciendo en el occidente de México, tratar de que minimizar los combustibles por las políticas de supresión, y más bien hay que manejar el fuego.
Gracias, Saraí. Buen punto. Okay.
Great. I just put the Google sheet back in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Let me put it in here actually one more time. And again, please feel free to private chat me, and I'm happy to add your comments. Sorry, I know we have some hands up, and Armando also, I know we're trying to have this stay fairly quick, but I don't know if we want to call on Jeffrey.
Yeah, Jeffrey, and I just want to say that Gwen, you're completely correct. One of the ideas throughout this process, not only the threat rating, but also the situation analysis, the strategy rating that we will do on in a bit, and the theory of change, they also start highlighting where our information gaps are or our knowledge gaps are. So this is a great thing to start putting in kind of a listing, all the gaps that we have, so that we can then direct research towards filling those gaps that might be very important for conservation strategies or for these species. So that's a great point, Gwen. Thank you for that. And I think Jeffrey had his hand up.
Yeah, I clarification. I thought I remembered another FOS exercises. Didn't we? Don't you normally rank each of these separately? Instead of combining.
We do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we do. We normally rank each one of the criteria separately. We're trying here to do a more of a holistic approach or integrated approach to these three, highlighting the three criteria, what they mean, but try to do this because of time constraints and also the number of people. I think it's working. We've got a whole bunch of good information here from you guys who are the experts. Obviously, we can go into a lot more detail, but I think this gives us a fairly good idea of what's happening and how different threats are in respect to in relation to the species.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll just help with some of the ambiguity that we were talking about.
Definitely.
Threats high and the severity is low or something. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think Jacqueline, we're top of, or I think we are already at the hour. I don't know if do we want to continue or.
Yeah, I think unless there's, I see there's a lot going on in the chat, and we'll make sure that gets captured. We love all of the engagement between folks, so that's really wonderful. We are, just to give you a reminder, we're going to go into a break and then start to think more about strategies. I don't think we need to completely cut this off. We're just using it to get a sense of the threats, and eventually, as Armando showed in that presentation, eventually we'll want to visually represent these threats on our situation model so that we can distinguish, if something is a very high threat versus a medium or low threat or high threat, and have just a little bit of the ability to quickly glance and show that they're not all at the same magnitude. I think we should stop there and note that we'll keep this open. After the break, maybe we'll just spend 5 minutes looking at the results all together and just make sure that generally we're feeling like they're coming out how people expected them to. And if you want to continue to add any ratings while people are on their break or while we're having that discussion, that's fine with us. So with that, can we come back and the fire, just because those two are ones where we're seeing a lot more variation. We're seeing 1s and 4s across the board. So we can just kind of use this before we make some of those, I'm not going to say final, nothing's final, but before we think about what the rating we want to display is, see how consistent your ratings are across that threat. So that's all I wanted to say. I know there are a few hands up. And feel free. Yeah.
Sorry,
I see some
Anna
things about
Fernando.
lack of data. We'll check in on that chat. Did you call in Anna? Sorry.
Yeah,
Armando.
Anna had her hand
Bueno, voy a
raised.
hacer mi pregunta en español y
Dale.
qué pena que mandé una carita mientras trataba de levantar la mano. Entiendo que la calificación de las amenazas se está haciendo para todo el ciclo anual y que vamos a formular unas estrategias para esas amenazas. Mi pregunta es, eso en general, como por qué se está haciendo, o sea, primero pues soy nueva a este proceso, entonces me gustaría saber por qué se está haciendo para todo el ciclo anual y por qué no se hace para, no sé, para la época reproductiva, migración y época no reproductiva, sobre todo pensando en las estrategias, porque asumo que los factores que están afectando cada una, que están causando cada una de esas amenazas, los factores de fondo que las están causando son diferentes durante durante las diferentes etapas del ciclo anual. Entonces, sí, o sea, mi pregunta es como, ¿cómo vamos a, y de pronto me estoy adelantando un poco, pero cómo vamos a poder separar las estrategias y los factores que los causan cuando son diferentes durante todo el ciclo anual?
Gracias, Ana. I don't know, Susan, do you want to, or Greg, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I understand what Anna's saying, and I think there's a good point that the strategies may be very different by region and depending on what the differences are in the threat ratings. So I know that we did this as an overall rating, but I wonder if there's some way that we can capture differences, whether it's breeding, migration, or non-breeding sites.
So
we
this
can-
is,
Oh, sorry, Greg, go
yeah,
ahead.
just this question came up again and again as we were preparing for the workshop. And I think one of the issues is we just don't have enough time to do 3 seasons simultaneously as part of the workshop. And so I think this is something we'll commit to do after the workshop, is as we, as Jacqueline and Armando capture areas where we think both the threats are different and the strategies are different during the 3 different stages of the life cycle, that we will promise to follow this up with any of you on the call that are interested and try to be more specific by the seasonality as it shows up, just because we don't have time in 3 days to address it as well as it deserves. And so we'll just commit to follow up after this 3-day process is over.
Thanks,
Greg,
Greg.
sorry for jumping on, but what is the limitation? Like, is the limitation for having more time to work on 3 different, like in 3 different sessions? Is it funding? Because I feel like this is like we are finding strategies to save hummingbirds in the West.
Yeah.
So I feel like I agree that 9 hours is not enough to
Right.
get all the information that we need. So I'm just curious about if funding or is the limitation behind time.
Yeah, I think we would, the whole group that was planning this meeting would love to have done 3 separate seasons and really have gone through this whole process for 3 separate seasons. But I think we decided we would go through the whole life cycle first and then separate it out by seasons in a later process. And we'll find the time to do it in a later process. But what we want to do today and tomorrow is for people to point out, hey, this is super important for non-breeding, or this is super important for breeding. And it may be more important for 1 season than for 3. So if we can highlight that today and tomorrow, then it'll be much easier to follow up after these 3 days.
Yeah, I don't know if there's somewhere we can put in the bike rack, if we can identify some specific items that might have different priorities in different seasons or on at those different periods. Just they can do it themselves.
Great, I can add that.
Yeah.
Susan, maybe I can add something to that. Directly to Anna's point, I agree with you. It would be really, really good to have the 3, but remember, we're trying to get a first overall view of what we plan as a partnership regarding these 7 species of hummingbirds. So maybe there are distinctions in strategies that we want to do in different places, like breeding, non-breeding, migratory landscapes. But I do think that we have to understand what the overall issue is. and then go into the details. And those details could be done by one of the organizations within the partnership with other partners, or it could be done as part of the partnership, as Greg was pointing out. So this gives a first overall view, and then we can go into it with more time, more efforts. But we get an idea of what is happening and how we can plan forward. Oh.
Thanks, Armando. Yeah, and I mean, if you've been in any other processes with us, like we have gone from everything from let's give it a rough guess to down to as much data as possible. And they both can be helpful, but it really just depends on what's needed to get a general sense to start the process. Because just a reminder, right, the more we focus on delaying a process with more data and more research and all of these tools, that's still a choice, that's still an action that's being taken as a priority over a different action. So we have to find that balance, and this is a expedited process right now, but it's great to see. It really is. We're on workshops all the time, and it is amazing to see how much engagement there is with this process. And I hope if that level of detail is needed, that there is support to continue this process beyond this workshop. Okay.
I think Fernando has his hand raised.
Okay, great.
Sí, buenos días a todos. Justo mi pregunta iba un poco hacia esa parte de la temporalidad, pero iba también orientada a las regiones. Yo creo que el identificar las amenazas por cada región nos va a permitir establecer o diseñar acciones específicas para atender esas amenazas en cada una de las regiones. Y quizá un primer esfuerzo sería, tenemos más o menos identificadas las regiones de cada uno de los participantes. Entonces esto ayudaría porque cada quien contestó con base en su experiencia en donde trabaja. Entonces así podemos identificar las amenazas para esas regiones, quizá primero por países, y ya después irlo haciendo mucho más específico, porque sí creo que los problemas que tenemos en México, algunos son bastante diferentes a los que se tienen en los Estados Unidos o en Canadá, ¿no? Entonces sí me parece que sería muy valioso el tener identificadas las amenazas por cada región y quizá algunas acciones se apliquen para toda la estrategia que estamos trabajando y quizá algunas puedan ser específicas para cada una de las regiones. Gracias.
Gracias, Fernando.
Okay, well, I'm sure people don't feel like they want to be done with this piece, but we are going to keep moving forward. We do want to show you some of the work that we've done between the sessions on the strategy brainstorm. And our goal today, and hopefully with time to spare, is to get to a point where we can identify some of the top strategies that we want to develop theories of change for. We'll go a bit more into what that means, but those models where we're thinking about how to get from strategy to kind of the increased health of these species, right? And defining those assumptions. As we go through this strategy process, and I will repeat this over and over again, we are wanting to prioritize what to use our workshop time on, right, for the next day and a half, but it doesn't necessarily mean that other strategies that we don't focus on in the next session are not important or are not going to be strategies that the partnership or organizations that you all work for are not going to implement. So I just want to make that very clear as we're going through kind of our final selection for developing theories of change, that it's what's important
right? Which is kind of always a criteria, but also what is most interesting for us to use this amazing group of 40, 50 people and your expertise on developing, right? Maybe that's due to complexity or due to the expertise you all hold. So I'm just going to share my screen and show a little bit about the process Armando and I went through, and he'll jump in as well. Of course, please feel free to ask questions or type in the chat as we go along. So I know you cannot read this. I'm not expecting you to. I am going to put the link back in the chat if you want to zoom on your own screen. If you're not very familiar with Google Slides, there is a magnifying glass that says zoom. So if you click on that, wow, that's a little too much zoom. You can move around the screen and have a little closer look. Maybe I can stay there. That's not too bad.
Which slide is this?
This is slide 27. I just put the link in the chat, but if you're already in there, you can scroll down to 27. And basically, all of these great brainstorm strategies, some of them there were dozens and dozens. We went through and started doing this fancy thing called lumping or clumping, not very fancy, and started to think about which of these strategies are similar, which ones are maybe the same as others, or could be part of a strategy. And that's what we expect is some of the brainstormed hexagons that you give us might be specific activities within a strategy. Okay. So I went down and started grouping these and came up with a header that hopefully represents the essence of the hexagons underneath it, right? And we're open to feedback. We don't want to get too fixated on the wordsmithing of these, because if it's something we move forward with for a theory of change, we can make sure the strategy is exactly like we want to write it. But I'll just kind of walk us through generally. There were quite a few strategies all about backyard and urban habitats. So we have create quality habitat in urban areas specifically. There are a lot on public outreach and education. I think if that's something we want to move forward with, we could be more specific or call out a specific type of education or outreach we want to focus on. There were a lot of strategies talking about restoration or protection of, I know those are separate, but in the same vein. Restoration or protection of habitats where hummingbirds, high priority areas that hummingbirds are in. There were strategies related to fire management and post-fire practices. Again, if that's something we wanted to move forward with, we could specify what that would entail. There were quite a few regarding agricultural practices, especially a lot of focus on chemical use, some with land in general, but there was a strong, a lot of additions about chemical use. Not surprising to us, we have a lot of great scientists on the call. There were a lot of strategies regarding research and monitoring. Developing better management practices and guidance, manuals, information campaigns. Some of these span across other strategies, like maybe into outreach or maybe into research. There was partnerships or establishment of hummingbirds supporting nurseries. So a large focus on nurseries and native plants.
collisions, right? So specific solutions to reduce collisions, lights, towers, prevention of window strikes, other pieces like that. And then kind of this other piece that again spans some of the other strategies, that's more about incentives and policies, right? So I know that's not a lot of time to digest, but is anyone feeling like there are major pieces that are missing, that are not represented either accurately or not represented at all, or new ideas since yesterday? Kind of leave the floor open for a minute or so.
I'm just going to jump in real quick and say that, and I think everybody here knows this, but as far as like promoting good agricultural practices, I think that including people who are in the agricultural business might help us zero in on some really effective policies. And so anyways, just like people have mentioned before, we may not all be the right experts in everything, but it's a good start. But just before we finalize things, we might want to reach out to others that have expertise in each of these types of things.
Right. So hopefully we at least have some clarity today of which ones we again can focus on. I don't want you all to think that means we're excluding anything else, especially because I agree it's very important to bring in other expertise. But hopefully we have something that we can start to develop those theories of change for, and those can always be continually vetted with people in the field. Greg?
Yeah, so I think, Deanna, that's exactly right, is that the reason we prioritize threats and strategies is so that we're aware of which experts are most needed to save hummingbirds. So it looks like these agricultural practices are going to be right at the top of the list. And so, yeah, so we can just prioritize bringing in the right agricultural experts and make that the thing that we put a lot of energy into in the future. So I think that'll be a great outcome of this process.
Any other comments? Can people, I know I can't see all of your faces. Actually, maybe I'll stop sharing real quick and come off the spotlight for myself and Armando so I can see more people. Is it possible for people to give kind of a general sense? If you don't want to turn your video on, that's fine. Maybe you can use a reaction, but do you feel generally like the strategies that were brainstormed are captured in, again, a high level sense so that we can start to think about prioritization? Can be a head nod, a thumbs up. I see a few thumbs up.
Yeah.
I see a hand
Todd,
raise.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I get to you, Todd. Great. And again, if you don't feel comfortable, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. Please feel free to message me individually with concerns. Again, I know it's a quick process to turn these around. Okay, seeing general consensus, Todd, I'd love to jump to you. And then if anyone else has questions, please just throw that raised hand icon up.
Yeah, I brought this up, I think, the first day, and I don't know if this is really the appropriate place to discuss it, but one thing, thinking back on the RAD process, and you have rising sea level, but we spend millions of dollars trying to maintain puddle duck habitat and hold back the tide, when a better response would have been to convert that to diving duck habitat and create puddle duck habitat elsewhere, right? And so that same process, while we address the threats and everything to try to hold on to what we have for Western hummingbirds, an alternate line that simultaneously probably should be happening is recognizing that some of the best wintering habitat is not going to be the best in the future with the changing climate, and better wintering habitat further north may need to be developed, and likewise on the northern end of the breeding range or the southern end of the breeding range of some of these Western hummingbirds. As that fails, we need to be looking at alternate breeding habitat or creating better habitat to the north. And it doesn't fit with this model as far as holding on to what we have existing, but it is an alternate track, a strategy that should be, I think, incorporated into a long-term view of how we save these species. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Todd. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're the one up in Alaska who also mentioned RAD, correct?
Correct. I'm at the very northern, the actual line. I mean, I'm trying to figure out where that breeding line is, and then hopefully, as they move further north into our refuge, will be a host for good habitat for the future, right? And so I'm just kind of now trying to figure out exactly where that breeding line is, and then watching to see if it's moving.
Great. Okay. I used to live in Homer, so it's a great place. But yes, that RAD framework. So I'm glad you brought that up, and that's represented in here. It's that resist, accept, direct that Todd is referring to, and that's more about, less about restoring, like you said, and more about strategies to adapt to climate change and think about where species will be and when to take action and not. I would love to ask the group, because that is somewhat separate, it's not necessarily, restoration. Do we want to have a strategy that is specifically about adapting to climate change? One of these gray boxes. And if so, does anyone have a proposal? And Todd, feel free to jump in if that's not what you're proposing, is having one of these gray boxes considered that's more about adaptation to climate change.
Nope, that's totally it.
Jacqueline, maybe
Great, I see Anna has a comment.
Maybe, yeah, that same box that Todd referred to, the conduct habitat restoration in high priority areas, that might be conduct habitat restoration and something else, adaptation or so, in high priority areas. The high priority areas for adaptation will be based on research and things like what Todd was mentioning about the breeding line. And the restoration would be in places where there's not sufficient habitat or it has been lost. Does that make sense? I don't know, Todd.
I think that's one solution. I think even more specifically with my question is, do we want to have a strategy that calls out climate change specifically, or do we want to think of climate change a bit more holistically, where we're just making sure we incorporate the trend of climate change into any of these strategies we're implementing? And I think we could go either way. And Sara E., you have your hand up, and then Jorge after her.
Sí, gracias. Mira, esa es una pregunta súper interesante y yo creo que sí deberíamos de hacer una estrategia de adaptación al cambio climático, porque dentro de esas estrategias hay, por ejemplo, actividades que tienen que ver como la restauración, tienen que ver con aspectos culturales también, tiene que ver con aspectos económicos. Y, por ejemplo, desde las áreas naturales protegidas en México, ya están, cada una se les solicitó a nivel federal que tuvieran sus estrategias de adaptación al cambio climático como áreas naturales protegidas. Entonces, yo creo que si nosotros pensamos de manera holística y viendo hacia dónde nos estamos moviendo con las estrategias de conservación y de cambio climático, pues yo creo que sería como la mejor opción para mí.
Jorge, and then yes, please, if you agree or not. I see some comments in the chat. Jorge?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important actually to point it out as a box. It's also very important to consider that it affects all the other stuff we're looking at. But by pointing it out, it kind of like make the strategy a little more sexy. And I think it's important that is very clearly marked there. So I really like this comment by Todd, and it should be put there.
Great. I'm going to keep it here. Again, this is just to move us into prioritization, so you don't have to, you still have a voice after this. But Anna, I saw you just put your hand down, but you do have the floor if there's anything else you wanted to say.
Yeah, I think it's a challenging decision, and I am going to put this idea just as an option. And I know climate change is important, but I see it as another threat, and it could be as important as habitat loss. So I think at some point we are going to define which threats every strategy is addressing. So I was wondering if at that point in the process, we can clarify and expand in those strategies that are specifically for climate change, because I believe that many of the strategies are going to overlap. So if we make a box for climate change, that box might contain many of the other strategies that are in the other columns. Just an option, and but because I don't know how the process is going to develop, so I don't know if in the future we are going to have the chance to specify the threats for each individual strategy.
Yeah, I mean, generally, we want to be able to see where they map out on that situation model. And Armando, in the next slide that he's going to chat about, I think he'll allude to this. I see a few comments in here as well, and specifically this first one, Christine. I think the second one we can. We hopefully have that fairly well captured, but we can add some more detail. But if you want to comment briefly on the first one, and then I think we want to jump into at least starting to head towards that prioritization, knowing that this conversation is not over. Christine, if you feel comfortable, feel free to speak up about the feedback you just put in. Otherwise, we can just look over that.
Did I do it right? I don't know.
We can hear you.
But I know, but I put the numbers on, but I don't see anybody else's numbers on. So am I just doing mine and then they combine them all?
I don't think we've had people typing in here. I think most people have just been discussing aloud, but we have lots of options for feedback. So
it's okay if I do that then?
Yeah, that's fine. We are going to move into prioritization. This isn't something we're going to wait to come back to tomorrow. So we want to make sure this feedback is incorporated right now.
Oh, okay. So I should type more in if I want to now.
Well, you had a question in there. I'm happy to ask it if
Where's my
maybe we can get feedback. So Christine said, need to
Oh, yeah.
partner more with invertebrate pollinator conservation initiatives. Not sure if this should go in the partner box with nurseries. Maybe there should be a gray box for collaborative partnerships with other pollinator initiatives. So question to you all, with these establishing partnerships, do we want to keep it extremely high level where it's, you know, establishing partnerships and you all can decide whether that
if we're working with the invertebrate community, you know, the Xerces Society or whoever, because farmers see a lot of pollinators as really beneficial to them, whereas they see birds or hummingbirds as, you know, nice to have, but not necessary for my product. So I'm just suggesting that gray box might be more generalized.
Do we have any disagreement with that? I think we can be more specific if that's one of the strategies we want to focus on. Then we can decide if we want more specificity. But right now, does anyone disagree with keeping this a bit more broad for now?
So at this point, it seems like I like the idea of adding pollinator groups rather than making it partnerships, because I mean, partnerships might be more broad than we need, but we definitely want to work with pollinator groups. So I think it should be nurseries and pollinator groups at this point.
Plus, it might even, I mean, again, yeah. So how do you want to word it? Because there's partnerships, you know, partnerships with government agencies, NGOs in general that are doing habitat restoration, for example. And then there's, you know, people who are very specific to pollinators. So that would all go under that box called partnerships or something.
Let's just have these as examples so we remind ourselves where this came from. I see that there's a handful of comments in here. I think we're happy to come back to some of the specifics, but right now we want to focus on these gray boxes. That's what we'll move forward with for prioritization. And again, we're prioritizing what we want to develop in this workshop, not necessarily what is just the most important or what will be implemented by all. So like for number 3, we're happy to add a hexagon that talks about citizen science programs and such like that. But there's one comment, so not sure if we need support incentives and policies. I'm happy to delete that now. Otherwise, my proposal is just let's see how that plays out in the prioritization. If you all prioritize that as pretty low, it probably just won't be a strategy that we develop a theory of change for in this next day and a half. So if people feel strongly about removing it, chime in, but otherwise we'll just see how it ranks. Anyone else who would like something addressed before we move into the next piece of it? And I'm very aware that everything will feel rushed, but again, we want to find that balance of actually getting the most out of all of your expertise and the limited time we have together. Okay, I don't see any hands. Armando, do you want me to just flip to slide 29 or do you want to take over the screen? I realize I'm not sharing my screen, so I guess I can or you can.
Can you
I
share
have-
your screen, please, Jacqueline? I think it's better. But Martin has his hand raised. Martin.
Okay. We can't hear you, Martin, if you're talking.
Lo siento, o sea, no podía, ¿cómo se llama? Quitar una ventana. Siento que parte de la, ¿cómo se llama? Para prácticas buenas para la agricultura, creo que aquí en México parte de la que tenemos que rescatar y muchas de las cosas interesantes que tenemos como nuestra cultura ancestral es el sistema de milpa. Y en observaciones personales y en observaciones de donde yo provengo, pues a las Rufus Hummingbird, pues llega ahí y se ha observado que es importante mucho el sistema de milpa para este colibrí, ya que se puede alimentar tanto de insectos que están dentro del sistema agrícola de milpa. Entonces sería como también incentivar, no volver al sistema tradicional de cultivos e incentivar como a las personas para que pues vuelvan a tener pues esas prácticas culturales. Y también pues la agroforestería pues es una cosa muy importante que tenemos que tener en cuenta, porque aquí también en la parte de Jalisco hay árboles que son tanto importantes para la ganadería como para los colibríes y también como también para producir alimentos. Entonces creo que tenemos muchos elementos dentro del sistema agroforestal y dentro de los sistemas tradicionales productivos de México que nos pueden ayudar también tanto a conservar las especies como a producir y a continuar con, pues, sí, con la alimentación del mundo, ¿no? Básicamente sería que quería decir, porque siento que tenemos mucho que rescatar todavía de nuestra cultura y nuestro conocimiento pues, ancestral de las prácticas agroecológicas, ¿no?
Gracias, Martín. Jacqueline, I'm going to continue in Spanish to address Martín. Martín, hay una caja gris, la cuarta de la izquierda, que dice promover buenas prácticas agrícolas. Quizás, pero en relación al uso de químicos. Pero quizás lo que queremos decir ahí es un poco más amplio, promover buenas prácticas agrícolas, y ahí caería, por ejemplo, lo de la milpa que estás mencionando tú, y otras prácticas agrícolas, y quizás incluso hasta agroforestales, no lo sé. ¿Te suena?
Sí me suena ahí, quedaría como dentro de esa caja, creo que me parece bien. Gracias.
No, gracias a ti, Martín. I'm just saying that due to Martin's comments, we could change the fifth, sorry, it's not the fourth, the fifth box, gray box from the right, from the left, sorry, and promote good agricultural practices. Within there, it's chemical use, it's the ecological practices, the milpa, more traditional practices in Mexico and Central America, and then agroforestry and the like. I think that kind of makes it more comprehensive. Thank you.
Christine, and then hopefully we can keep pushing forward.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. A couple of things. One is the research questions I have are long, like there's a long list, and I'm having trouble like kind of getting them in on this thing. So I guess I could submit those. I'm asking other people who may be having trouble. Okay, I got my number, I got to move it over there, then I got to type in. So I'm just wondering if, I have a list of them that I can submit them separately, because there's too much to type in a short amount of time. And the second thing is, I'm really glad Martine brought up the aspect of Indigenous knowledge. And I think that so just to clarify, you've got it now under fire and agricultural practices. Is that correct?
Oh yes, that's correct, because milpa is one of the indigenous practices that have been along the Mexico's history and other parts of Latin America too.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I think that those, it fits in there. I'm not sure how it's going to be said, but I think, again, when we mention the word partnership, and we have it on our list. Again, partnering with Indigenous partners. It should be on that list, not just NGOs. And it might also be relevant in the gray box under habitat restoration. And I also have one more comment, which is, I don't think I see anywhere on here under habitat issues is managing ungulates. But I think they're invasive species, but I don't know if it includes invasive, if you want to call it invasive. I mean, I've seen it other places, invasive native and non-native species. And that includes, a lot of ungulates that are eating flowers. So I don't know if we want to be specific, I'd say the word ungulates. Again, typing it in this on here and moving my numbers around. I'm not being that nimble with it, so I decided I'd just say it.
That's fine, but we just had those in there to give multiple ways for people to contribute. I think all of those details are helpful, and we can make sure they're incorporated. I think for this level of detail, and again, we're very aware, Armando and I have been through this process as participants as well. We're very aware that each step is likely going to feel more simplified than you'd like, but we do want to be able to get into understanding some of those assumptions for the actions that are likely to be taken. So I'm happy to make sure that some of that information, like the ungulates, or even having potential issues with native invasive species, is captured. Are there any other high-level comments on these gray boxes that we need to hear from you all before we start to think about how these, which ones we should focus on for our next steps? Okay, hopefully that was enough time for folks if they were trying to get off of mute or type something in the
Jacqueline.
chat. Yes, go ahead.
No, just I want to share in Spanish, we was talking here in the chat box that maybe it's not clear for me that we told that hummingbird also represent different things for different cultures. And sometimes in different regions, they catch the hummingbirds for illegal traffic or religion and other things, right? But I don't see a strategy that can address these threats. I don't know if it's so different from environmental education, because I think it's also part of the indigenous knowledge of our culture. For example, many hummingbird was used in the very past year, like a beautiful piece of art in the woman dressers or other kind of culture. But I don't see if we're gonna have a strategy for that kind of stuff that are more related with human dimensions. But it's just that some other participants also think maybe we need to have a strategy, extra strategic column for the kind of thing. I don't know what the other thing.
I don't think I caught the last sentence of that. I'm not sure if Armando, you can, or anyone else can summarize what that last ask was, or you, Miguel.
I think that Miguel has a point there in the cultural nuances of hummingbird capture. So hummingbird feathers are used culturally for in design of clothes and traditional clothing, for example. It also is used for good luck and love charms and the like. And none of the strategies really talk to that part. Maybe say in public outreach and education is not enough. Maybe it's a different strategy, or maybe we can think of public outreach and education and give it a broader name, a broader sense to talk about behavioral change and or I don't know, advocacy for cultural change and valuation of hummingbirds without having to trap them or be, turn them into clothing accessories. But the human dimensions, as Miguel was pointing out, which I think is really, it's a very good comment because it does not appear in the strategies. So we have to take a look at that and what is a cultural nuances that we can maybe influence. That's right, Miguel?
Yes, yes.
So we can add that as a gray box. I think it's up to you all if you want to make sure things like Indigenous knowledge and practices and traditions are incorporated into the strategies that we develop theories of change for. So imagine improve fire management. Maybe one of the first things you do, depending on your context or your area, is understand the historical Indigenous use of fire, right? So there's ways that you can incorporate it depending on your landscape into each of these strategies, or just as we have this conversation about climate change, or you create a separate strategy in itself. It's up to you all. We've done it both ways. It can be more powerful to integrate it into each of the strategies there in one sense, but also depending on your organization or how important the naming is of these strategies for funding or other things like that, if it needs to be called out separately, that can be helpful. So we want something a bit more specific. If we wanted to put something as regarding behavior change, that's fine. The inappropriate, I'm just commenting, I see the hands, I'm just commenting on a few of the chat pieces. Inappropriate human intervention, so that's one of those threats we identified. So hopefully some of these pieces are addressing that threat. And human dimensions, again, I think that's the essence of it, but hopefully we can be more specific. Greg also put a proposal for just adding culturally appropriate public outreach and education to make sure that one of the first steps is probably identifying what your audience, depending on your context, needs. We work a lot with behavior change, and I mean, you hope that's the first step for any of these, but it can be helpful to call it out.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, please remember that these strategies will have different nuances depending on where they are implemented. So it's not the same to have a public outreach and education strategy in Alaska than it is in Oaxaca or somewhere in southern Mexico, because it's going to be different culturally speaking, but also with the milestones and the outcomes that you want to reach. But they both kind of can be figured or can be inserted under the umbrella of, I'm going to go for Greg's proposal, culturally appropriate public outreach and education. And that means it takes into account the culture of the place where you're implementing it, but it also takes into account the objectives that you might have that might be a little bit different depending on where you are.
Yeah. Last comment, and I promise I'll call on you, sorry, E, is so keep this in mind as we go into the theories of change, that these are going to, again, probably be more high level than you would like, these need to be generic enough that each of you in your different geographies, as well as organizations that work across these different boundaries, can take one of these models and adapt it to meet their needs. So we want to call out that the audiences will be identified, that the correct behavior change levers are being used, that it becomes social norm. We want to find those trends, and then the specifics will be something that if this is a strategy your team is implementing, you guys can change these and adapt them as they're most appropriate to you. Otherwise, we would be developing 300 theories of change right now, right? So we need to make things specific enough that they're usable, but general enough that each of you individually or part of your organization can take them and use them for your own projects. Sorry, E, and then hopefully we can, I'll jump back to Armando. Sorry, E.
Sí, yo, ¿sí puedo hablar? Sí, ok. Sí, solamente para darle continuidad a esto último que comentó Miguel, y agradezco mucho que haya traído este punto porque también yo lo estaba buscando en las cajas grises y de repente pensé cuál sería la mejor manera de ofrecer como estos cambios de mentalidad en las culturas y de entender, por ejemplo, existe todo un libro sobre las historias de los colibríes en Latinoamérica. Es muy, muy bueno y en este libro hace referencia de aquellas prácticas antes a lo que hoy estamos viviendo. Entonces, yo siempre digo, no sé en qué momento nos perdimos, que ahora, por ejemplo, más recientemente, el usar a los colibríes como amuletos está viajando hasta Oregon y no dude que llegue a Canadá y Alaska también. Entonces, estas prácticas que de repente se están desatando o se están extendiendo mayormente, creo que sí las debemos de parar. Y yo había puesto aquí en el número 9 que tuviéramos como estrategias para fortalecer capacidades de desarrollo humano y entre ellas era como la construcción de la cultura preventiva. Es decir, dentro de cambio climático, toda la gente rural, la gente de todas las ciudades también están conscientes de lo que es cambio climático, lo hemos vivido y por eso yo pensé que el hablar de estos cambios de formas de valorar a los colibríes pudiera ir dentro de las estrategias de cambio climático, porque es contradictorio a veces pensar cambiar ciertas formas culturales y digo, hay controversia desde un punto de vista también científico con las publicaciones y ustedes, bueno, muchos de Latinoamérica conocen a Toledo, ¿no? Donde Toledo menciona el por qué no quitar esas prácticas antiguas. Entonces yo creo que ahora necesitamos sí darle a conocer a la gente que no son los tiempos de antes, que estamos en cambio climático y tenemos que hacer adaptaciones y esas adaptaciones también tienen que ver con los cambios de la manera de valorar a la biodiversidad y especialmente a los colibríes. Por eso, resumiendo, yo pensaría que es un buen punto y pudiera también ir dentro de la adaptación a cambio climático.
Okay, thank you guys. I know there's several more comments being put in here, but I do want to remind folks that we do have limited time, and the least bar we get when we have all 45 of you on a call over this next day and a half, the harder it's going to be to get even some of these kind of generic theories of change to you so that they can be adapted and all of this great detailed information can be added, just because we're not going to come to a consensus where it's going to be representative of all of your different geographies and experiences and knowledge. So I just want to flip to this next slide, and Armando, if you want to chat just for a few minutes to orient people here, I think this will be a good segue into our next activity, and hopefully we'll at a high level, we'll get some sense of what people want to work on for the rest of today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Jacqueline. That's great. So what we've done here, and you can see that there's 11 strategies. These are the gray boxes that you've seen in the prior slide.
I can add that climate change.
It's already in there. Climate change is there.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I've polished the wording so that it reflects the last conversations. So the idea here is that I want to make a distinction so that you are very, very clear about the strategies, is that there are strategies that work on the enabling conditions, things like the public outreach and education, the research and monitoring, the incentives and policies, everything that you can do, and the partnerships, building partnerships with Hummingbird supportive practices. Those are the kind of strategies that support or help enable the conditions for conservation to be effective. Then you've got others that are nearer to the threats, let's say, and change drivers that are really, really closely linked to the threats. Things like adaptation strategies that you might do, practices, improving fire management and post-fire practices, developing better management practices and guidance, promoting good agricultural practices. These are nearer to really impacting and changing the threats. They're nearer into changing the human behavior. And then you've got the ones to the far right that have to do basically directly with changing those threats, creating quality habitat in urban areas, conducting habitat restoration in high priority areas, developing and implementing solutions to reduce collisions. These will directly be linked to more habitat, to better habitat, actually, not even more, but better habitat, and to reducing the loss of individuals, of hummingbirds, specimens or individuals that have problems in collisions. So this is not a way to tell you, oh, this is more important than the other one. It's just an idea that you start thinking, okay, so we've got different strategies, and in order to really have an effective conservation of the hummingbirds, we need strategies that move at the 3 levels. We need strategies that move at the habitat and individual hummingbird levels. We need strategies that work at the planning levels and changing the behaviors and changing the practices of people. And we need also strategies that are linked to sustainability of our initiatives, that are linked to really changing the whole system, changing the incentive, the policies, changing the information we have access to, changing the way we build alliances, and changing the way we educate or we do outreach. Does that make sense? I don't see any. Oh yeah, Todd. Thank you, Todd. I hope the rest also have some level of thumbs up. Anyway, that's it, Jacqueline. I think we can jump into the strategy selection now.
Okay, and I didn't do any updating. I'm not sure if you did.
I did.
Oh, thank you, Armando. What a great co-facilitator I have. Okay, so we added in here, just like the threat rating criteria, we added in here some considerations when we're thinking about strategies, re-emphasizing the fact that as we're rating these strategies,
one of the big things we want to talk about, and I'm going to add it right here, is what should we work on in this workshop, right? And if you want to consider that during the rating, that's fine. But otherwise, even after we get the ratings, right, just like the threats, that's not a decision for us. If a rating, you know, everyone rates as the top strategy and another one towards the middle, right? We are going to use that as the starting point for our discussion, but we're not just going to say, oh, the top 4 strategies that were rated are the ones we're going to develop theories of change for, right? We want to make sure that they're not only important and following these criteria, but that it's an interesting strategy for us as a group on this virtual call to be working on together, right? If there's a strategy that's pretty cut and dry and pretty self-explanatory, right? We do this, this is the outcome, then maybe we don't want to spend our wonderful time with all of these experts to develop a theory of change. So we will use this as an initial prioritization, and then we will think about which ones are most interesting of those that we deemed important, which ones should we work on together. So often we'll look at criteria such as feasibility. So which of these strategies could an organization successfully implement given financial, staffing, technical constraints, right? We didn't want you to consider this when you brainstormed, but now we have to think about, is this strategy even possible? And then additionally, this meaningful impact. So if this strategy is implemented, will it lead to desired changes in our situation, right? Within this Western, this kind of Western US, Canada, and Mexico. We had the partnership also think about some other criteria that you all should consider. So is this adding value, right? So a kind of a piece of that meaningful impact. Is this a unique contribution, right? Are there already dozens and dozens of other organizations who are doing this well? Is there a high amount of risk associated with this implementation? Sometimes that's okay to be willing to take the risk. Sometimes we're unable and there may be another strategy we choose because of how high risk is. And again, thinking of that opportunity for implementation, right? Again, that possibility of whether this will be successful or not. I will put the link back in the chat, but we wanted to keep the trend, to do something somewhat similar, but we'll note that there's one big difference here. So as you're rating here, we'll ask not for you to put a 1 through 4 here, but I'm going to change this. We now have 11, but we want you to rank them in relation to one another, right? Because often when we do a 1 through 4 scale, it's easy for people to just want to put a 4 for everything, right? They're all important. So relative to each other, we're going to have you rank them 1 through 11. 1 being the lowest kind of score, the lowest priority for you, the one that you're less interested in working on or developing this theory of change for, and 11 being your highest score. I hope that's pretty self-explanatory. Please only use each number once. You should have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 in there. And then we'll just use this to look across and see if there are some strategies that are very high with numbers compared to others. Armando, anything you want to add? Otherwise, this is in the same tab as the threat rating. So I see some folks in there, but I will put this back in the chat. Otherwise, you can start whenever. I will also double check names. I know I added a name or two in the last tab. So if you're not seeing your name,
shoot me a message. I'll try and figure it out as well. Greg, I will add you. I didn't take your name away. I added you to the other one. So let me add you back in. If you're having any trouble, please feel free to write it in the chat or private message me, and I can add your ratings. You can use these blue numbers on the left to denote which ones, so you don't have to type out the strategy name. Looks like people are doing pretty well. You can keep in mind the threat rating we just did. Some of these are quite associated with threats identified. I'm also seeing that there are some people using the same number over and over. So you should only have one of each number. So you cannot score everything as an 11. You are ranking them relative to one another. So you can only have 1, 1. You can only have 2, 1, 2. Decisions must be made. I'll stop sharing my screen unless that's helpful. I know some people have finished up. We'll give you just a few more minutes. Christine, it looks like you have 2 6s. I'm going to try and put the sums down below. So you should have a total at the bottom of 66. If you have more than 66, you've used a number more than once. Okay, 1 more minute. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break in about 30 seconds. So if you are done, feel free to go on your break early. But please note we're going to come back at 52 past the hour. So if you're leaving now, come back at 52 past the hour. And if you're still working, go ahead and spend the next 30 seconds or so to wrap up. I'll give one more reminder. If you have more than 66, a total of 66 in the bottom, then you've used a number more than once. So please make sure to correct that so our numbers can be accurate. Okay, enjoy your break. We'll see you at 52 after. Thanks, Michael, for joining.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. We'll see you tomorrow. Unless he's already gone.
All right, I know that never feels long enough, but we've got just over an hour left, so hopefully people are trickling back in. Feel free to give a thumbs up if you're back. There's 3 of us at least. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks. Thank you, guys. Great, that's super helpful. I know it's easier to just, if we were in person, just see if you're there or not. Okay, thanks to those who made changes in here. I think we just have, I tried to message a few people. We have a few higher numbers in here, but I think generally getting the sense we want. I'm just going to sort these real quick. Ooh, let's see. I'm used to doing A to, let's see. Will A to Z work? Any experts, Armando? I can sort these. I know there's a way. Oh, here we go. Well, I'll take a look at that. But anyway, we can start looking across our results. I'll start highlighting some of these higher values here. Any initial comments before we jump into this, or questions? No? All right. We have quite a few kind of in the middle. These three, maybe we can highlight these as well. That other color is a little too dramatic. Okay, so let's just take a look and see where we're at and see if we're agreeing with much of this. Okay, so conduct habitat restoration in high priority areas is what's coming out on top. That's this guy right here, number 9. Right after that, we have research and monitoring. And then we have promote good agricultural practices. Okay, so we have 3 that are pretty distinct. After that, we have the climate change adaptation, the fire management and post-fire practices, and the culturally appropriate public outreach and education. So let's focus on those right now, but is anyone feeling like the incentives and policies, the partnerships, the BMPs, habitat in urban areas, or collision reduction should elevate up to kind of the level of our discussion right now? Is something we want to work on. We can bring them back in, but anyone right now who wants to advocate for one. Yeah, Sarhi and then Jorge.
Sí, en relación a las prácticas, yo sí quiero, bueno, de políticas, hablando de los incentivos y políticas, para mí son muy importantes porque, por ejemplo, en la región hemos impulsado varios procesos locales para que no haya tanta deforestación a causa del agave, a causa de los monocultivos de aguacate. Y no hay una fuerza, no va a haber solución si no hay algunas políticas donde nos podamos unir internacionalmente también hablando. Y creo que eso es un aspecto muy preocupante, de verdad. Es triste cómo se está transformando los bosques tropicales en agave y aquí en Jalisco, y los bosques templados todos en aguacate. Entonces, yo sí defendería este punto de políticas para hacer algo, porque debemos de empujar, yo creo que desde diferentes ángulos.
Thank you, Jorge, and then I want to make sure we have responses to.
My comment is exactly the same as Sarai's. We need to work with policies too. I will raise that to like the yellow level that you put in there, Jacqueline.
Great. Do we have anyone who's, again, this is just for us to think about which ones we want to work on. Anyone disagree with us considering that one moving forward? We will continue the discussion, of course. Okay. Thanks all. For now, unless there's any other comments, I'm not deleting these, I promise. I'm just going to hide, or maybe I'll even just move down below. That's probably easier. Some of the other strategies, and we want to start thinking about, again, we know these are all important, but we want to think about which ones do we want to develop results chains for. And Armando, do you think it's helpful if we do a little presentation on results chains first before we finalize these? Yeah, okay,
Yes, I do. I do.
okay, great. I'll jump over there.
Just one thing. The moment you started moving them, I think, yeah, I think the
I messed it up.
sum.
Okay.
No, the sum is messed up. There's a way to change it, but
Yeah.
oh, are you?
I'm reverting back.
So I can do it while you do the presentation. I'll just.
Great. Thanks, Armando.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I promise I will be brief. You don't need to hear me talk long. But just like Armando was pointing out some of those criteria for threat rating in a little presentation, we want to continue on and talk a little bit about what our next step is. So hopefully we can even get to the point where even if it's just the start of a discussion, we can work on this today. Otherwise, our whole session tomorrow, we are dedicating to starting to develop what we call theories of change. Okay, so this is all about understanding assumptions, right? And not enough organizations do this, and we hope that it's becoming more common practice. Funders are actually requiring theories of change more and more. But the general sense is we want to think about how do we get from our strategy to our goal, right? What are all of the assumptions in between, right? We're making an assumption by saying a strategy is going to work. How are we saying that strategy is going to work? We're in this step 2 of the conservation standards, right? Our assumptions piece right here. So what is a theory of change? This is a series of causally linked, right? So they need to be related assumptions about how a team thinks its action will help it achieve the intermediate results and the long-term conservation and human well-being goals. We're going to talk about it in a diagrammatic form, but a theory of change can be a text, diagram, or other form. So you could write a whole paragraph, and that could still be a theory of change. We are going to be developing the diagrammatic form or the visual form of a theory of change, which we call a results chain. And in this results chain, we'll clarify those assumptions by creating a sequence, right? Just like we wanted to tell a story with the situation model, we'll do the same thing with the theory of change, right? Tell the story of how we're going to reach our goal or how we think we're going to reach our goal. Oh, that's what it says right there. How do we think we're going to contribute to that health? The other thing that pointed out is these are assumptions that can be tested. So it's becoming vital that we think about the monitoring pieces and tracking our progress in conservation work instead of just choosing a strategy because we assume it works and actually having no evidence that it does. One thing that we often do is look at our situation model and think about how we change situation model into a results chain. So which contributing factors become intermediate results and which threats are we trying to address in this theory of change to hopefully have a reduction in that threat. The intermediate result is the future state of the contributing factor, okay? So how do we get from our strategy on the left to our target on the right? We have in blue the intermediate results and in purple the threat reduction result. Obviously, we can see right here, this is overly simplified, and we would want to build out all of the different steps for how we get from promoting sustainable fishing to increased knowledge on sustainable fishing. So a good results chain is results oriented. We are not creating an implementation chain. We are not creating a chain where we say we're doing this, 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 and that's what we're linking together.
we're creating a chain where we are assuming what will happen depending on the actions we take. We can add those actions in, but we want to think results oriented. We want to be able to read them as if-then statements, like you just heard me say. If we do this, right, then this will happen. If this result happens, then this result happens. We want to show change. I'll give some examples. We want it to be reasonably complete and yet still simple, right? We don't want paragraph boxes linking to other paragraphs. So when we're building them, which is what we're going to do, we're going to construct an initial chain. It may not feel complete. Complete the links, and then look at those criteria we just discussed to make it a good results chain. In this detailed situation model here, you can think about, all right, which are the factors that we might want to develop a chain for? And then start to think of those as how can we turn them into results, right? How can lack of employment opportunities be addressed so that it's a result? If our strategy is to support enforcement capacity, maybe we want a result to be that prosecutors have increased knowledge of the laws and that the communities understand the impact and that there's more engagement, right? Again, that's fairly simplified. So what are we going to do to complete the links in this chain, right? And make it so that we can actually track progress and track our assumptions. We might add in more details about increased capacity or research pieces, spatial pieces, probability. We might add in pieces of legislation or punishment, behavior change, right? Fears. All of this can also, right? We can also bring in additional strategies. So we want one primary strategy, but it doesn't mean that the other strategies we work on may not be influencing this results chain. Again, come back to our criteria. And we can think about, is this a result, not an activity? You don't see that any of these say, talk to poachers, right? That may be important, but we don't want that to be representing a blue box. So if we have one that says train prosecutors in wildlife laws, how can we turn that into a result, right? What are we hoping they get? We're hoping that they increase their knowledge. Maybe we add an activity of how we're going to get to that result. If then, right, if the authorities approve patrons and there's increased capacity, then there will be increased spatial and temporal patrol efforts, right? So you can walk through that logic. And then how do we demonstrate change, right? Do each of these boxes show the change we're hoping to see, the assumption we're making? Are we trying to increase community engagement? If so, we want to show that the result is increased community engagement, right? Maybe the result is the understanding, or again, illegal hunting reduced. If there are uncertainties, still, we have our bike rack, but there are ways that we can address this in the results chain as well. Those are things that maybe when we're tracking progress, we would want to see if some of those uncertainties have been resolved. And here I just put in an example because we're using Marathi, the software, as you see in our situation model, of what a results chain could look like in Marathi. I know that's a crash course. So we don't expect you to be experts, but hopefully it gets your mind thinking again in that if-then statement and thinking about the fact that we want to explicitly put in these boxes our assumptions, right? It's a fun exercise to think about
what do we expect will happen? What do we want to happen? And let's write that out so we can track whether it does or not. And we can track whether our action is actually making a difference. So I'll stop there. We do have a few resources. One that maybe I should take you to real quick, and I'm happy to put in the chat, is there's a page on Marathi called CAMEL, the Conservation Actions and Measures Library. And this is pretty amazing because not only do we have all of these public shared projects, but there's a team working to develop generic results chains so that you all in your teams can have a good starting point. So there's a habitat restoration chain, right? And maybe this isn't exactly what you want to do with your organization, but maybe it could give you a quick glance at some of those pieces that you would want to look out for. So this one is a very simplified, that's why it says high level, but maybe you think, oh, we do want to make sure the sites are identified, and we do want to make sure that there's, you know, restoration at scale. Maybe you go into more detail as well. And you can think about, oh, we've identified the key orgs, we know the key jurisdiction decision makers, the restoration is happening, and how those outcomes work. So this is just a great resource. It is on the website. I'll make sure it's more prominent, and we can send out this link as well. But it's pretty fun to just go through the different results chains and see if there are any that are relevant to a project your team is working on. Okay. Any questions on that? I see a few things. All right. Clear as mud. Okay, I will jump back. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. I will jump back to our strategy ratings here to help with our prioritization. And today, I think Armando and I will be quite strict with the fact that today we do need to identify which strategies we want to focus on to develop our theories of change. Again, it doesn't mean the others are being deleted. Armando, anything from you? Thanks for rearranging some of these. Okay.
I just filtered them. So according to the sum, and I moved number 3, the one that Sarai and Jorge were talking about, and moved it up.
Great.
So we have the top, yeah.
Gracias. Okay. And I'll move that out so you all can see. Do we have any disagreement, or not even disagreement, but any of these that wouldn't have as much value by working on in a group? And I can call out a few examples. For habitat restoration, is that something that would benefit from having a group of, let's say, 20 or so people working on together? Or is that something that you all feel you do often enough, or are familiar with, that chain is a little bit more self-explanatory? I don't know the answer for hummingbirds. It could be very complex, but that's the type of things we want to think about. Does everyone feel like it would be worthwhile to have this group of experts
developing the assumptions for how to get from habitat restoration to healthier hummingbird populations. Should I stop sharing so we can all see each other? Yeah, okay. Maybe we can have a little bit more of a discussion here. So we want to think about, right, which strategies we want to start developing theories of change for. Okay, they don't have to correlate specifically with our scores right here. So that's what I'm trying to get us to talk about. Are there any on here that were ranked high that it may not be very helpful for us to do as a large group of experts? Simon.
Hi, I think as individuals, many of us are engaged in research initiatives, but I would think it's not a like productive use of our collaborative time to advance these goals, since we have such disparate research focuses.
Great. So that's a perfect example, right? Is maybe research can still be tied into some of these other strategies as a first action, but because there are so many different research agendas, it may not be useful to have a generic research and monitoring chain. Does anyone disagree with that?
Partially. I agree about the research part, but the monitoring part, they might be able to have a discussion on that. I think that there's more commonalities on that one.
Okay, so just noting that for now, how we have it, we kind of have this piece as one. Unless we want our strategy to just focus on monitoring, maybe that's something that, again, we're not eliminating it, but we can kind of lump for now.
Well, I guess I'm going backwards here, but probably I was thinking about that when I saw it. I was like, probably there should be a separate box for monitoring and research, and then research. They can obviously, they can overlap and they can interact, but they are two different things. So I don't know if you want to go back and break that up, but I feel it should be.
I'm also seeing Jenny's comment. This is all live. This is all in Google Slides. So if you want to make any changes, we can see if it changes any scores. So please feel free. So I see there's a vote for number 7. And I think that's probably a pretty good complex one that could use some expertise. Again, we're going to choose probably 4 of these to try and get started on tomorrow at most. So anyone disagree with number 7, right? Thinking about good agricultural practices being one of the theories of change we work on. Okay, I'm going to call that consensus. Remember, in our ground rules, silence means agreement. So I'm going to say, again, feel free, but let's say that that's one we'll try and work on tomorrow. I see some thumbs up. Does anyone else have a strong proposal, one that could really benefit from this expertise? Don't be shy. It's usually easier for people to react to something you say. So it could be a good kickoff for a discussion. What about climate change adaptation? Thinking about climate smart practices.
I'd like to speak up to that. I think there's other ones that, as a group, that we could speak to, especially anything to do with habitat restoration, that I would vote for as a higher on the climate change adaptation. Not that I don't think that that's a factor, but I think people might feel like there's something more I could do now than doing the climate change adaptation part. So I would go with habitat restoration. Put that forward as maybe other people could tweak it to which one they want, but anything to do with that.
Okay, and I see some people who are advocating for climate change adaptation, as well as improved fire management and post-fire practices. I know this is a very large group to be trying to have this discussion with. So if we need to do something a little more formalized, we can, but I'm hoping that people speak up and we can get some consensus, again, just to move forward. Todd?
Yeah, I think thinking about it from just like a slightly different thought process. Right now we have this, suite of experts across this beautiful geographic distribution. And so, I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of whether you call it habitat restoration or habitat improvement. We have experts across that whole range, where some of the things that we're looking at are maybe more specific to a certain component. At least, look, whether it's climate adaptation wrapped into habitat restoration / improvement, at least we have this geographic distribution of contributions from the group. And that just seems like a very positive thing to take advantage of, having everybody in the same room and thinking about it from that standpoint.
Todd, that was for 11 for the climate change.
Well, I think several of them are, I think they're all, wrapped into or in some way interactive. And so, we're not gonna tackle habitat restoration improvement without some level of research to identify the best spots to do that or the best ways to do that. So I think the habitat restoration improvement one is a great one to look at because we have people from across the entire range. It's going to be a different process in each and everybody's places, but they have something geographically to contribute, and wrapped into that is the climate change component, because it's what improvements are you going to make in your area that are adaptive to the changing climate, right? So some of these components, research is going to be wrapped into every single one of these things we tackle. It's not a standalone, or none of them are standalone, right? They all go part and parcel together. And so, but I like the fact that we have a geographic range of people. And so that makes sense to deal with some of these spatial issues.
Great. I'm seeing some agreement in the chat, but please speak up if you disagree. And also there are a few comments, even going back in the chat, for improved fire management and post-fire practices. So right now I have these 3 highlighted, and we would love to highlight one more if we can in the next few minutes. Otherwise, I say we just get started on what we have. There was discussion early on about incentives and policies. And I know there's still some chat about research and monitoring. I'm just not sure if it's in support of these other strategies or to work on in isolation. So it looks like Christine has a proposal for this to be the 4th. And I know we had some people speaking up about incentives and policies. I'd love to hear some new voices. Okay, so 9, we can lump 11 into 9 if we'd like. Silence. Armando, do you have a recommendation? Should we just get started, or should we try and highlight one more? And if anyone protests, then yeah, we will see how it goes tomorrow.
I would suggest we can start with 2 now, but Lisa has raised her hand, but I would
Okay.
say start with 2 now, and maybe tomorrow at the beginning of the session, we can return to this and see if if we can highlight another one.
Great, Lisa, and then we'll try and jump in.
So I just wanted to comment that, sorry, I'm trying to find it on here. But maybe with the topics that we're talking about is kind of similar to research, because, you know, a lot of these are going to, they'll be prioritized as areas, and then the research in those areas will be prioritized, but maybe public education, culture, and outreach could be tied also into that, so that some of the areas that need to be prioritized, and that's kind of a big category, kind of like research, also need to be categorized into these things that we're prioritizing, and make sure to address those and tie it in.
That's a great point. And even when I was doing some of this sorting, a lot of them I duplicated because they fall into more than one area, and we didn't want it to be lost. And just to move forward and remind you all how vital your work has been, a lot of these we can actually look at the gray heading here and look at some of the hexagons you've created. And for some of them, the theory of change is, you can already see the story being told, and some of these can directly turn into activities or results that we're wanting along the way. So thank you all for your comments. I think we at least have 2 that we can start on today, and we'll work on those tomorrow as well, and hopefully be able to jump into 2 additional ones. Great. Maybe everyone can just take like 30 seconds to decompress, stand up if you want. And Armando and I will give you some next steps. Okay. Hopefully you got a few shoulder rolls in during that. So we're just going to spend about 20 minutes. We are not expecting to even get close to finishing one of these theories of change. We just want people to start the process so we can come back to this tomorrow. And also so you all know maybe which one you want to work on with myself or Armando tomorrow, and come with some ideas. So Susan, I think the plan is we're going to split off into 2 groups, but we'll just set up one breakout group and send people off into one breakout group. If you are a Spanish speaker and you don't have a preference or a strong preference for which results chain you work on, feel free to stay in the main room here, because there will be simultaneous translation. If you are interested in the other group, there will still be a translation it will just be consecutive. Okay. All right, now we just have to decide which two we're focused on and create a group. So I think our first two that we had a strong preference for were habitat restoration and good agricultural practices. Unless we're seeing that the same people, the exact same people, are going to want to be in both of those groups, that could be one way we split off today. Otherwise, we could do one with habitat restoration or good ag practices and the other with the fire management. Susan, do you have a sense, or any of you, if we would end up with the same people?
I really don't.
Okay.
So I've made the breakout room agriculture.
Great.
So if anybody who wants to go to the breakout room for agriculture, you'll go there. Anybody who wants to stay for habitat restoration will stay in the main room. Claudia will go into the breakout room and Edmundo will stay in the main room. You ready for me to open it?
Yes, I'm ready. And Armando, do you want to stay in here where they'll be doing simultaneous translation, or is it more beneficial for you to go where it's consecutive?
I'm not sure it matters really.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll open the room now then.
Great, thanks, Susan.
Jacqueline, which one do you go, or should I go?
If you have a preference for topic, otherwise the main room will be simultaneous translation and the breakout room will be the consecutive. Okay, so I see a few people joining. If you click on your breakout room button at the bottom of your screen and you scroll all the way down, you'll see a title that says agriculture, and you can click the blue button to join. We can also assign you, just shoot a message to us in the chat and we can move you over.
Yeah, do let us know if you can't get it to work for you. I see people moving though.
Great, keep moving yourself over. We want the groups to be a bit more even. So if you have an interest in agricultural practices, then move on over there. And Armando, I'll move in there and let you get started in here. Keep sending people into our breakout group.
So I'll do habitat restoration.
Sounds good.
Good. Okay.
So we have about maybe half the group now in, little less than half the group in agriculture. Is that enough? Christine, do you want me to move you to agriculture? I'll move you over.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to move but can't do it? I'll just put you in there. Okay, Adam.
Adam wants to be moved. Okay, perfect.
I just can't find him.
That's.
Oh, there he is.
Okay, that's about good. We've got.
All right, that
20.
looks good. We have 13 in agriculture and 21 here. Wait, is that right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Bigger group here.
Okay. Give me a second. Okay. I'm gonna show my screen. We're gonna be working on Marathi, which makes it easier. Let me show my screen. I've had a couple of setbacks with my internet, so if I just stop sharing or something, don't worry, I'll come back. So the idea as can everybody see my screen? Yeah, great. Okay. So we have we're going to conduct habitat restoration in high priority areas That's the idea. That's the strategy. You can see it here in yellow, a yellow hexagon. And this addresses several of the threats that we were looking at in the presentation. Let me get to the presentation. So some of the threats that we were looking at, give me a second. I'm going to go to one that hasn't much. So when we look at conduct habitat restoration, we're trying to reduce. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. Problems that, this is in Spanish. Let me go to English. We're trying to address things like habitat destruction activities, habitat degradation activities that might be impacting on several of the, that's why I was wrong. This is not the, there it is. So habitat degradation and habitat destruction activities. And obviously, as Todd pointed out and others, the idea of taking into account climate change effects. So let's go back to Muradi and let's think about what are the results that have to happen if we conduct habitat restoration in high priority areas. Let's just brainstorm. That's what we will be doing today, and tomorrow we can organize them or order them in more of a sequence. So what are the results that should happen?
I think obviously we would expect to see hummingbird use of the newly restored areas, or an increase in use from existing conditions.
Increase in hummingbird use of restored areas. Okay, so that is far to the right? What other results do you come? Let's come up with 5 results, and then we can start organizing them. And if you've put something in the chat, I'm going to have my chat. Okay, Sergio says more resource increase in suitable foraging habitat. Okay, let's put some increase in suitable foraging habitat, and use also said increase in suitable nesting habitat. Okay, but as Todd pointed out, we don't only want to see this, we also want increasing hummingbird use of restored area, which is linked to the more resources that Sergio's pointed out. So I'm going to put that here. More resources for hummingbirds. Okay. What you're mentioning, yeah, increased productivity and breeding habitat. So we're thinking more of how this ends up in the target, which is increase in hummingbird populations. Would that be correct? Yeah. Yeah, and you're right, Erin, more resources. We're talking about floral, and insect. Okay. So I'm going to move these a little bit here. So the idea is we've got increasing suitable habitat, then we've got this provides more resources, and more resources involves increasing hummingbird. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, that sounds good. What has to happen before? Let's move this side because I think we have clarity in this part. We're talking about an increasing hummingbird populations that will happen because there's an increase in productivity and in a use of these restored areas, more resources due to an increase in suitable foraging habitat, increases suitable nesting habitat. What happens now? Well, before that, sorry. Increased productivity. That's a biophysical, let's put it as a biophysical result. Increased productivity in breeding, increased productivity, okay. Okay. Yeah, Gwen, that is true. We have to think that this at some point will also be replicated elsewhere. So there has to be some knowledge management of this. And I'm going to put it as a text box here. Model, effective model, replicated elsewhere. Okay, we're going to have that, keep that in mind. So we need, oh, here, there's something from research and plants needed and site selection. So we need site selection. This I'm going to use as activity. Oh, sorry. I'm going to put an activity now. Just a minute. I'm not getting activity here where we can move with text boxes for the time being. I'll get the activities afterwards. So we're talking about research and plants needed. We've also got, you mentioned research in site selection. Okay. I'm going to put these.
More than research, can it be, I mean, more specifically, prioritization of site selection?
Prioritization, selection, or selection of sites, right?
Yeah.
For restoration. Okay. There we have it. Let's put it here. This is one of the things we have to do kind of at the beginning. Research and plants needed. There has to be seeds. Somebody mentioned, I'm sorry if I'm going slower, but I'm trying to get everything. So we need sufficient seeds. Sufficient seeds for restoration. Probably this is near the places where we are, but let's do that. Availability of seeds, native plants. Yeah, seeds for restoration. I'm going to put native plants here. It might not be the only thing, but let's move that. Native observance, it says replicated plant lists are only half the battle. Successful seed, plant material increases successful seed deployment and survival. Okay, there's a lot of research going in there in plants. Needed plus what was it? Survival, not plus survival. Tenencia de la tierra, so land tenure. Selection of sites for reforestation. This has to take into account land tenure. That's a good point. Gracias, Veronica. Effective for adaptive management. Yeah. Effectiveness monitoring. So this has to go with monitoring. That's for sure. But so let's say that we do the research. We know which plants are needed. We've got the sites. We know where the sites are going to be. We find out that who has to agree? Who has to agree? Oh, sorry.
Land manager.
Oh man, I'm going to put another one. Yeah. So there's first, it's not only that the sufficient seed for restoration. This could be changed because it's about the nursery. Sufficient plants in nurseries, and land managers or land owners. Land managers if it's public, land owners if it's private, agree with restoration plans. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got this before. As you see, there's what we call a leap of faith going from here to here, right? So we have two leaps of faith. From starting the strategy to getting the land managers, landowners to agree with the restoration plans to the increase in foraging habitat. Not only a leap of faith, there are results that are missing, also time, right? Land ownership and sourcing, okay. Who are lo que dijo Saraí, quienes son los dueños, who are the owners of the ecosystems? Community, right? Ejidos. Restoration will also include the removal of invasive species and creating increased connectivity to large patches of natural lands.
Yeah, we definitely need invasive species in there.
We need what?
We need that removal of invasive species is key.
Okay. Remove invasive species. That's a good point. This happens after the site selection, but that is also another important action. What else? Is there something else that I'm going to try to make it smaller and move this?
In a lot of places, we need to reduce activities that are reducing plants.
So, what do you mean reducing plants?
So if people are using herbicides on these lands, if they just stopped using the herbicides, we could restore the lands.
Oh, okay. So stop herbicide practices. Give me 1 second. I'm going to change my. Oh God.
Greg, I'm going to not disagree with you, but I'm going to maybe suggest we shift our focus a little bit from removing invasive species and herbicides to increasing the availability and diversity of appropriate species. Because I think you're going to get tangled up with that you have to use herbicides to get rid of invasive species. And if you replace invasive species with only 1 or 2 native species that don't, complete the full suite of what hummingbirds need. Oh,
there you go. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear everything. Can you repeat? Sorry, Diana.
Oh, no worries. I was just suggesting a slightly different way to look at it would be that rather than focusing on reducing herbicides or removing invasive species, which can get very tangled up, that we maybe focus on increasing the diversity and availability of the appropriate floral resources. And then however people, choose to achieve that is fine.
of floral resources, right?
Availability and diversity. Diversity is a really big one, because without diversity, we're not gonna get past these climate change issues.
I agree with you, yeah. But I think this is kind of, yeah, it kind of fits in here. As you see, we have two parallel things already. One has to do with the resources, right? Increasing the availability and diversity of floral resources at those sites that we have selected. And the other one is getting the land managers or landowners to agree on the restoration plans. Right? Sarai, you're talking about incendios, about fires, but you mean like fires as for preparing of the place? Yeah, incendios forestales. I'm gonna.
Armando, sí, y ahí abonando un poco más a la idea de Saraí, como para preparar el sitio, los incendios forestales, el manejo de fuego que se va a hacer, pero no solo eso, sino también después de todas las actividades de preparación, pues aquí en México es muy importante excluir el ganado, porque tenemos el ganado que anda libre por cualquier lugar y entonces eso pues ya echaría a perder todo nuestro trabajo.
Sure.
Cattle exclusion. That is part of the restoration plan. So all this section here could be the restoration implementing. Right. This is the let's say the implementing the restoration plan involves cattle exclusion and involves good management of fire. Is that right? Good management of fire?
Sure.
Okay. And that should be part of what the restoration plan is going to be, what it's going to look like. Okay. Or land man, yes, I hope that is will fall upon by the best of all it asks to do as a measure of I've put here more resources for hummingbirds, flora, and insects, but are you saying that this increase in availability and diversity of floral resources would we need to do something about insects so that diversity and availability of insects also enhances?
They'll probably follow the plants.
Okay.
I agree with Deanna.
Yeah. Eric, what do you mean with land management practices? Where do you see that? Or is it that instead of restoration plan land management practices?
Just when you were writing good management of fire, I was just thinking there's other, it's not just management of fire and cattle exclusion.
Got it.
Pesticides.
So this could be like a whole set of things. Okay. Okay. We're nearing the hour. This is a good first brainstorm. Let's figure out what we're missing, especially around here in this part. But it's clear we need to get the land prepared. So land management, the wherever the restoration is going to be, there's going to be people saying, yes, let's do this, right? So there's advocacy there, there's communication, there's several actions that we need. And then we need the materials, which are mainly floral resources. and that involves nurseries and seeds and the like. Somebody open their mic. Do you want to say something?
We had prioritization in there, but it's gone again. But it seems like we said in your hexagon, we said high priority areas. So we've got to prioritize.
Yeah, there's selection of sites for restoration. Do we want to identify high priority areas as an action?
I think so.
Yeah.
This goes
The
along
selection-
with, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jenny.
I think this is just kind of in support of what you're saying, Greg. I feel like everything that's up there, a lot of it is stuff towards the end of the chain, but I'm curious about what are the barriers right now to conducting habitat restoration in high priority areas? Sort of what are the things where we need people to be doing something different versus what are the things that we're going to see on the ground once that restoration happens? That's what's missing for me in this chain, in that blank area.
Yeah, so I think that land manager owner agreement is huge because a lot of these lands are used for economic purposes or other uses that are not conducive to pollinator conservation.
I completely agree. I'm going to stop sharing because we're going to be going back to the room. Everybody's coming. But Jeannie, that is exactly one of the things that the theory of change helps visualize is what is to the left. What do we need to do in order for that right part, which you got clear enough, happens. Thank you, both you and Greg for that discussion. Jacqueline?
Thanks, everyone. I promise that's not the end of our session. That was just to start thinking about it, and also so that when we come back tomorrow, instead of starting from scratch tomorrow, you can come with, all the ideas that I'm sure you will be dreaming about tonight. I've had many dreams about results chains. So we'll be excited to jump right back into those groups tomorrow. I just wanted to note to you all that we will look at the feedback for the situation model tonight and come with as much as we can get revised by tomorrow, as well as on our end, any outstanding questions we have for you all that we felt we wanted more input in. There's a few things in the bike rack, so please feel free to put any comments in there. I'm also going to link the website one more time in here. If you haven't been on there, look around. We may be able to add some other resources. The recording is on there, as well as additional information. One little piece of homework, it's very small, that you all can help with is we didn't have much discussion about this vision statement yesterday. So in our slide deck, and we'll make sure this gets sent out, but on slide 3, if you have any comments, right, we want to make sure everyone feels represented. If you have any comments or ways to improve the vision statement, feel free. This can be an open slide, an ongoing slide. Feel free to add your comments, and we'll make sure the partnership and myself and Armando are looking at those not only throughout the next day and a half, but if it needs to extend. Okay, so we'll send that out. I think that's all from me, Armando. Like I said, tomorrow we're jumping back into breakout groups. So we're going to dedicate the whole session to developing theories of change. So we look forward to a very collaborative session. Susan, Greg, with our last minute. And you're on muted.
Thanks. Sorry, it takes me a minute to get off that mute for some reason. Thanks, everybody. We want to wrap up just by saying how much we appreciate your being here again today. I think we're getting into the what do you call it, into the weeds. I don't know how that translates, but really into the part that we, how we need to move forward. So your participation is critical. This is just a brief overview of the schedule for tomorrow. Same time again, same place. I'll send out another email tonight. And just so you know, thanks so much to Jacqueline and Armando. There's a lot of work that goes into this behind the scenes and late at night to get all that information up on the website for you and to pull together all your thoughts that you've had during the day. And today's been really good. It's been great to see your support and all of your thoughts and the information that you're providing for hummingbird conservation. I just want to put this out there now, and we'll repeat it again tomorrow, is that it doesn't end with this workshop. We need an active team to carry us through and to keep us going. I envision this as a very active and live conservation plan, one that we refer to, and if we have to, adapt and address as we move forward with our efforts to protect migratory hummingbirds. And also looking at ways to implement strategies for hummingbird conservation. How are we going to do that across the range of these hummingbirds? Also to recognize the comments earlier regarding the need to address differences in different ranges, whether it's non-breeding or breeding or migration route ranges. We will address that request. And we also think it's important, as Jacqueline and Armando said, it's difficult to fit everything into these sessions, and we're getting as far as we can, but we know that we're not going to finish tomorrow. This is a good start. So, but we won't be done. And so what we'll do is we'll set a time for a separate session, and we'll prioritize threats by life cycle so that you can then consider strategies and threats based on, again, breeding, non-breeding, and migration areas. So any questions before tomorrow? Any thoughts or needs? Now's your chance. And I actually don't have the chat box up, so if there's anything in there. Otherwise, again, we look forward to seeing you back tomorrow. It'll be the same time, same place, and I'll send it out again tonight. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
And we'll keep the WHP committee on just to wrap up.
Great, we can do that. Do you want to stop the recording?
Thank you, I do. And I just love it that you remind me.
I'm always